This is Omnivore presents SciDish, a podcast from the Institute of Food Technologists. In each episode, we take a deeper dive into a single topic shaping the future of food. Hosted by the editors of Food Technology, together with IFT members and subject matter experts, SciDish brings you the science, insights, and real-world perspectives that drive innovation, solve complex challenges, and connect disciplines across the global food system. Thanks for joining us. Let's get into the conversation.
This episode of Omnivore is brought to you by Almond Board of California. Almonds offer endless possibilities for innovation. Learn more by visiting almonds.com/trends.
Welcome to the Omnivore Presents SciDish podcast, where we offer a deeper dive into the science, trends, challenges, and innovations shaping our food system. I'm your host, Julie Larson-Brisher, Food Technology Magazine's Science and Technology Editor, and today we're diving into a topic that continues to trend in the product development space, sugar reduction. We know that growing consumer demand for healthy products and increasing regulatory pressures to reduce sugar content is driving industry to find new ways to tackle the challenges of reducing sugar in food and beverages, while maintaining flavor and other sensory attributes of these products. Today, we're joined by two stellar food and nutrition scientists and the authors of IFT's Sugar Reduction Toolkit resources. Our first guest is Dr. Lisa Sanders, owner and principal scientist at Cornerstone Nutrition, LLC, and a consulting nutrition scientist for IFT. Lisa has spent more than 15 years advancing evidence-based nutrition, including managing scientific research programs at Kellogg Company and Tate & Lyle. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, Julie. It's great to be here.
We're also happy to welcome Renee Leber, IFT's Food Science and Technical Services Manager, whose experience includes over 10 years of product development experience working for Jenny's Splendid Ice Creams, Freshway Foods, and U.S. Foods. An expert in food additives and ingredients, Renee leads IFT's concierge service, helping teams across the globe find solutions to everyday product development challenges. Welcome, Renee.
Thank you, Julie. Happy to be here.
Great. Well, now let's dive right in. There's a trifecta of trends: regulatory, industry, and consumer, driving this low and no sugar food and beverage product development. Would you give us a little background about these drivers and talk about research and advances that are emerging? And let's go ahead and start the conversation with Lisa. What do you think?
Absolutely. You're right. We're seeing a convergence of science, regulatory, industry, and consumer forces that are all pushing sugar reduction forward. From the consumer side, it's pretty clear people are paying attention. Over 75% of Americans are actively trying to limit their sugar intake. At the same time, there's a bit of a paradox. 6 in 10 Americans prefer the taste of sweet over any other taste, yet 8 in 10 believe it's important to reduce the overall sweetness in their diet. So there is a growing conscientiousness about sugar and to some extent sweetness as well. On the regulatory front, the U.S. now requires added sugars to be listed on the nutrition facts panel, and the FDA has proposed a front of pack labeling rule that would categorize added sugars as either high, medium, or low. Globally, and even in some cities in the U.S., we've seen taxes implemented on sugar-sweetened beverages, and even in some parts of the world, they're going further, requiring warning labels for products that contain sweeteners. From an industry and market perspective, demand is booming. The reduced sugar market was valued around $46 billion in 2021, and it's projected to more than double by 2030. So that growth is pushing companies to innovate quickly. Finally, in terms of the science, the evidence overwhelmingly supports the need for us to reduce the amount of added sugars in our diet. And low and no calorie sweeteners continue to be a helpful solution. Despite some controversies, high quality randomized control trials support the role of low and no calorie sweeteners in weight management when they're used to replace sugar. Most of this research has focused on beverages, so we do need more data on foods. And there's also some exciting work going on looking at sweetness exposure and whether or not we can actually shift our preference, our taste preference for sweet over time. So there's a lot going on to drive sugar reduction forward.
I'm one of those 6 and 10 definitely looking to reduce the sugar, and for weight management, just sort of overall health. I have a real sweet tooth, like many people, and I'm wondering though. I'm surprised now that I really read nutrition labels how much sugar is in products I didn't expect it to be in. Are we seeing more? I mean, there's some obvious things like, a sweet soda or something like that where there's sugar in it, or a dessert or something. But like tomato sauce, tomato soup, like these are things that I love it. It's really healthy and good, but there's some sugar content in there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you're right.
That's actually a debate amongst product developers as well that we've been hearing. We've heard some product developers say that those sneaky sugars add up, and they add up within diets, and they add up for consumers. And there is a truth to that, and that sugar should be concentrated kind of where we're expecting it in these little indulgences that people will seek out. We've also seen the opposite come forward of, yes, there's too much sugar in the average American diet, but is it the small amounts in the equivalent of your salad dressing, or is it the piece of cake you eat at the end of the meal? And I think there's a lot of truth to be said about both. I don't know that there is a one size fits all for consumers. Personally, I have a sweet tooth as well, so I understand both sides of this story. I am one of the people who doesn't necessarily want to give up the cookie at the end of the meal, so I'd like to talk through both. Lisa, I don't know if you've seen that as well.
Yes, I think as we go forward, particularly with this front of pack labeling rule that's going to be coming out, it's going to become even more apparent to consumers, the added sugars that are in food that you don't expect them to have added sugars, because now you still might not know unless you turn around the package and look at the label. So I think that's going to come to the forefront even more. And to your point about, most people look for sugar where they expect it, for example, in a beverage. That's actually where most of the science is focused too, is on sugar sweetened beverages. And there's a bit less data on foods in particular. So sort of what you're saying, like little bits of sugar added to different foods. And the other piece of it is reducing sugar in food doesn't always reduce the calories. And that's part of the challenge with reducing sugar, because the main problem is it's extra calories without extra nutrition. And so you need to reduce your calories. And when you reduce sugar in food, you don't always reduce the calories. So that's going to be, I think, another challenge going forward.
Well, that's a great segue into my next question, which is, what do you both think about, what are the important factors, I guess, to consider when you're formulating or refining recipes with low or no sugar claims? Renee?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot to consider when developers start to reformulate. Best case scenario, you're going to see developers who reformulate products where they're specifically focused on flavor. And that's going to be some of the products where sugar is added to give it a more complex flavor, a roundness of flavor. Then you only have that one property that you're really focused on. You only have to replace the sweetness. But when it comes to formulations that are things like baked goods, this can be something that's extending the shelf life. It can be binding the moisture. It can be a large volume of your product. So when consumers have products like a brownie that has 60% sugar, and they're expecting this brownie to be a certain size, they're used to the flavor, and a company reformulates, not only do they have to consider the flavor, but they have to consider the size of the brownie. They need to consider the texture of the brownie. They need to consider the moisture of the brownie. All of this is impacted by sugar. And that's where this really gets very complicated. It's when sugar is not just playing the role of sweetener, it also is doing 4, 5, 6 other things within the formulation that now additional ingredients are being added, sometimes per function. And so you're seeing a larger amount of ingredients go onto the label. Sometimes they're ingredients consumers are less familiar with, which also causes a bit of reticence from consumers from purchasing those products. So it's a complicated switch beyond what most people think of. Lisa,
Right.
I don't know if you've seen that with your clients as well.
Yes. So I know one of the things that's I have found interesting to consider when formulating and refining these recipes is consumers are just all over the place, really, when it comes to what sweeteners they're willing to accept. So while most consumers prefer the taste of sugar, only about a third of consumers regularly consume low and no calorie sweeteners. And then there's another third that intentionally avoid foods with low and no calorie sweeteners. So I think it's really challenging for product developers and for companies. They're walking a tightrope sort of here between getting the taste and the functionalities, like you said, and also meeting that consumer expectation and earning the trust of the consumer.
And not to mention the elephant in the room that no one ever wants to talk about, but cost. Cost is going to be a thing within these reformulations. It's not something we like to talk about because it typically only goes in one direction, and that's not the one the consumer wants it to go in. But that's another tightrope these companies are walking. They have an expectation set from consumers as to what the price point of their product will be. They have expectations set from consumers, to Lisa's point, about what the sweeteners can be. And sometimes these don't match up to the end goals of what the optimal product is. And then developers really have to go back to the drawing board and try and figure out what's a must-have, what's a nice-to-have, and where there might be some wiggle room.
Right. Did you guys have to think about all of that when you were developing these IFT sugar reduction resources? Is that included in there?
So I would say that and more. There's a lot in the IFT sugar reduction resource. I would encourage everyone to download it, take a look at it. It goes through all of your major sugar substitutes within the US, kind of in detail. It looks at regulations from around the world. It'll talk through some of the considerations and substitutions. It goes into some of where these sweeteners perform best, be it high moisture, high acidity, whatever the case might be. It talks through combinations. We have some sweeteners that we know have metallic aftertaste, bitter aftertaste that pair well with other sweeteners. So it also goes into some of those combinations. But I think for product developers that are looking to reformulate a product that needs some help as to what's out there, what are the big concerns, what are some starting places, this is going to be something that is going to help them reformulate those products.
Right. Do you, when we're talking about formulation or reformulation, how hard is it to use like substitutes or alt sweeteners? Maybe you want natural instead of a synthetic. How hard is it to maintain like your product sensory attributes?
So it's going to be difficult. Some of that is going to depend on how much wiggle room you have. Realistically speaking, some come very close to the taste of sugar. Others will deliver on sweetness, but maybe not a clean sweetness. And so some of it depends on what are the other flavors. Can those flavors mask some of the flavors of the sweeteners? Not all substitutes for sugar are going to work well in all environments. So that's also going to be a limiting factor. After that, it's figuring out what your customer wants. Does your customer accept synthetic products? Does your customer accept artificial sugars? Would your customer accept a added sugar amount that is lower? Would your customer accept some natural sugar substitutes that, again, have some level of calories if it's a calorie reduction? And understanding what that main consumer goal is, I think will help understand what tools are in the toolbox that are suited for the product.
So, Lisa, what do you think about the natural sweeteners providing some sort of nutritional functionality? Is that happening?
Well, a lot of this depends on what the particular sweetener is that you're using. So if you use stevia, that's a classic example of the natural sweetener. When the stevia plant, if you're consuming an ingredient for sweetness that has more of the plant components, such as different phytochemicals and phytonutrients, you may receive some benefits from those. There's not a lot of science on that. And the amount you consume will be so small, you can't expect there to be that great of a nutritional impact from these sweeteners because you're consuming a very small amount of them because they're intensely sweet. Another thing, though, to consider is that using stevia again as an example, the sweetener portion of it is highly purified. It's extracted and purified to the point that sometimes there isn't any additional beneficial nutritional ingredients in there, even if it's phytochemicals and phytonutrients. Sometimes those things will come along, but the more purified the ingredient becomes, a lot of times those beneficial ingredients that were naturally part of the plant are eliminated as well. So I think those are just two things to keep in mind, is a lot of times these are very purified ingredients, and also you're consuming a very small amount of them, so you wouldn't and shouldn't really expect a huge nutritional benefit in such a small amount.
We'll be back with more SciDish in a moment. But first, a quick message from our sponsor.
This episode of Omnivore is brought to you by Almond Board of California. Almonds offer endless possibilities for innovation. To help you stay ahead of the curve, Almond Board partnered with TasteWise, a generative AI platform for modern food and beverage brands to identify trends that will shape the future of snacking and beyond. Get inspired and learn more by visiting almonds.com/trends. Again, that's almonds.com/trends.
And now, back to SciDish.
When we're talking about research in the sugar reduction space, where is it most heavy right now outside of the sweetened beverages, or what direction does it seem to be taking?
So I will say where I've seen the science taking the direction of science going now is higher quality studies using the appropriate comparisons and controls, particularly when it comes to low and no calorie sweeteners, to show whether it's impacts on body weight or impacts on glycemic markers, blood glucose markers. They're doing a lot more high quality research in that area, and it's giving us a clearer picture about the role of low and no calorie sweeteners for benefits such as weight management or diabetes. Another area that we're seeing more research is with the gut microbiome. And that research area is just sort of exploding for all types of ingredients, but in particular with sweeteners, there's been some interest in the fact that these sweeteners could potentially modulate the gut microbiome or have certain effects because of their ability to change the gut environment. Most of these sweeteners are not absorbed, and so that is a very good hypothesis to put forward. Right now, it's still an emerging area. There's a lot that we don't know about the gut microbiome. For all that we know, there's a lot that we don't know. So we're still sort of just figuring that out, and that needs to be figured out before we can really better understand what sweeteners are or are not doing to the gut microbiome. And then probably the third area that I'm seeing the most research in is this idea of sweetness versus sugar reduction. So the science is always focused on sugar reduction and potentially the benefits of low and no calorie sweeteners for sugar reduction and health effects. But now there's more research coming out on this idea of sweetness, and can we adjust our sweet taste? We've seen with sodium, if you slowly reduce sodium in your diet, your taste does sort of adjust to that, and you get used to eating foods with less sodium in them. And then when you go and eat something that has a lot of salt, you think, oh my goodness, that's so salty, I can't eat it. With sugar, we don't know if that'll happen. We don't know if you continually reduce your sugar intake over the long term, do you adapt and start to not prefer things that are sweet? The small trials that have been done to this point don't seem to show that we can adapt. We just love sweet. So it'll be interesting. There's more studies coming out that are longer term and more people and higher quality. And so I think that will give a better picture of whether or not we can truly change our taste, change our preference for sweet, which will be absolutely critical if we're going to continue to try to reduce sugar in our food.
Yeah, what do you think, Renee? Do you think that, you have experience as a product developer? What kind of research do you think would be useful?
So to Lisa's point, I think there's a wide variety of research that would be, and I think it comes in two different categories. The first is, I'm a product developer, I work for company X, I'm reformulating product Y. My main goal is probably going to be to keep it as consistent as possible for the consumers that are currently buying it. Then you have the research that looks at it as more holistically from a societal standpoint. And I think those are two interesting but different objectives. So for your average product developer, you're looking for, how can I meet my consumer expectations? And to some extent, there might be some wiggle room there. There might be an opportunity for a second product that is a reduced sugar product that might have less sweetness. I'll reference some of our sweeter beverages. We know that certain beverages have higher sweetness perception and levels than others. Different consumers do prefer different things within that. So I think there's an opportunity to maybe capitalize on consumer preference right now to see if you have more people who are willing to walk down the sweetness, who are willing to go for that lower sugar product, knowing that there might be less sweetness there. You might have the opportunity to market to consumers who maybe are not quite as sweet loving as the average American, or who might prefer a lower sweetness for some of these products. And then I think the bulk of what we're going to see is product developers who are trying to match the sensory profile of a beloved product with less sugar in a way where the consumer can feel good that they're consuming this. It still feels like that indulgence. It still meets all of those check marks, but now it has 20, 30, 40% less sugar, and they get to feel good about that as well. And I think that's the space where this becomes very nuanced.
Right. Well, I'll throw this out as a final question. What's your top practical advice to product developers who are looking to hit that sweet spot in applying alt sweeteners in new products or reformulation?
So I'll start with one of the things I say most often. I learned this as a hard won lesson through my career. Know your customer. Don't assume you know your customer. Actually know your customer. Know what drives them to buy the product. Know why they're buying your product. Sometimes it might be that your cost is in line with what they need. Sometimes it might be that they love the taste. Sometimes it might be that they've been buying this product for 20 years and there's a nostalgia there for them. It really depends, but know why your customers are buying your product, because when you change that, you're going to see customers start to look for a similar product elsewhere. Once you know that, if you're a clean label company, adding a artificial sweetener might not be the right answer for you, even if you can hit a very similar taste. If you're a value product, putting in something like stevia might be difficult for your product because you might outprice yourself. Knowing that customer, knowing that product is going to help. And then the next thing I will say is It's almost never a one-to-one replacement. We all wish it was. Everyone wishes that you could take sugar out and drop something else in the same proportion. It normally doesn't work that way. So understanding that it might be a sugar system, understanding that if you replace sugar in a product where it's doing a lot of the heavy lifting across multiple categories, you're going to need to look at this as a holistic reformulation. Anything that is on the table for reformulation moving forward, this is probably going to be a good time for it. If you're one of the many, many companies right now looking at colors, this is already a holistic reformulation. Might be a good time to get everything done at once. But looking at it as, I have a chocolate that has X amount of sugar in it, and I'm going to take that percentage and get it down to a third of the sugar when it's a high percentage, is not necessarily going to work unless it's being looked at as a holistic reformulation and figuring out everything from cost to texture to flavor, and then what are your consumers willing to accept?
And I would say from my perspective, I could not agree more. That was the first thing that came into my mind when you asked the question, is know your consumer. So I would just echo everything that Renee just said, that you really need to know what their expectations are. Are they willing to accept natural versus artificial sweeteners? Are they open to a less sweet profile if that means using real sugar in the product or the reformulated product? So I absolutely agree with all of that. And food scientists are incredibly skilled at designing products, but they really need to know what these end goals are, because if a consumer expects a sugar-free version that tastes identical to the original, that's a completely different approach than if you're okay to have a slight change in sweetness, for example. So I would agree with everything Renee said. And I guess just to add one additional point is just being transparent in your labeling and communications. Consumers are becoming more and more label savvy. And as for example, when the front of pack label comes out, they're going to become even more savvy as they learn to use that more. And it's going to already somewhat be interpreted for them if something's high, medium, or low. So just be transparent and in your labeling, and a clean and understandable label can really go a long way in building trust with the consumer, especially when you're introducing a new sweetening approach to your food.
Oh, great. Thanks so much, Lisa and Renee, for sharing these insights with our SciDish listeners today. And listeners, as I mentioned earlier, please do visit ift.org to access two of our latest resources that were created by Renee and Lisa. The free to download Sugar Alternatives at a Glance resource, and the IFT members only Sugar Alternatives Overview. These really provide key information on widely used artificial and natural sweeteners, such as regulatory status, considerations for substitutions, and sweetness levels compared to sugar, all of which can help you streamline the sugar reduction product development process. And this episode, which goes live today, July 14th, marks the first day of IFT First annual event and expo at McCormick Place in Chicago. You won't want to miss today's keynote at 3:30, Reimagining Flavor, Reducing Fat, Salt, and Sugar for Healthier Foods. We're also featuring a fat, salt, and sugar reduction tour of the expo floor, a walking tour of companies providing product developers with practical and innovative solutions. There's still time to register at iftevent.org. Thanks again, you guys. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to this episode's sponsor, Almond Board of California. Almonds offer endless possibilities for innovation. Get inspired and learn more by visiting almonds.com/trends.
And that concludes this episode of Omnivore Presents SciDish. Thanks again to our guests for another amazing discussion. SciDish is produced by the Institute of Food Technologists and the editors of Food Technology magazine. To learn more about IFT and how we convene global food system professionals to advance the science of food, visit ift.org. If you're not already a member, head to ift.org/membership to find your place in the IFT community. For more insights, ideas, and innovation, check out our sister podcast, Omnivore, on the News and Publications page of ift.org. Join us again next month for another timely discussion. This is Omnivore Presents SciDish.